It is a general popular error to suppose the loudest complainers for the public to be the most anxious for its welfare. Edmund Burke. Please remember.
There's already nailed it in terms of the name with the tweet. So he's on your medium on Twitter. Arya may not have seen that because he's not on Twitter.
Did they get sent to me by Ed?
I think the short answer is yes. I think that there will be central bank digital currencies, Bank of England, the Fed, ECB, other major central banks. It may take a few years, but they're certainly working hard on that. And I think it's going to happen for several reasons.
Mark Carney is a former governor of the Bank of England as well as the Bank of Canada. He currently has a seat at the Group of 30 and the UN Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. In 2019, he spoke about a synthetic hegemonic currency taking the role of the US dollar as world reserve currency. In other words, a basket of currency price feeds inside of a token. Not a basket of currency, but currency price feeds, like the platform Mirror that has synthetic stocks. They're tokens that have a price feed from the original stock projected into another asset. A synthetic hegemonic currency would be a fresh layer of debt. He thinks that the Fed, the dollar, the ECB, the euro, the Bank of England, the pound will all have CBDCs or central bank digital currencies within the next few years. Every nation is in a debt crisis, and fiat is pegged to fiat. The US is adding more and more debt as time goes on, and eventually the system will be overloaded with debt. A synthetic hegemonic currency will work if nations update to digital currencies. I believe Mark was foreshadowing the plan at Jackson Hole to transition from the dollar as world reserve currency to the synthetic hegemonic currency as world reserve currency.
The Bank of England is a paid customer of Ripple's.
The Bank of England had a proof of concept with Ripple's interledger protocol. Now the Bank of England is a paying Ripple customer. I'm assuming since the Bank of England is now a Ripple customer that the proof of concept went well. Mark also mentioned the ECB. Project Stella between the ECB and the Bank of Japan tested interledger protocol. If England found success with interledger, is it a stretch to believe that the ECB and Bank of Japan found success as well?
One is, cash is not totally going to disappear, but it's disappearing. Secondly, that there is some positive, also some negative innovation going on with private digital currencies and stable coins and other things. And what we can't have, the history of money, and the book goes through some of the history of money. I couldn't help myself, went through it, but is that any good innovation from the private sector in terms of money is ultimately appropriated by the state.
Yes.
Through the central bank.
The central banks are going to absorb this technology and make it their own. The coins that are utilized by the traditional systems will be the winners.
Because the core of the system has to be credible and trusted and rock solid. The bottom line, and it's not just Bitcoin, but these stable coins and other things, they are not there for eternity. There are issues with them. There's sometimes huge issues, sometimes smaller issues, but smaller issues that become big issues under stress.
Bitcoin stable coins are not going to be around for eternity. There are issues with them, sometimes huge issues. I will take Mark at his word. The reason I always liked Ripple is because they were pushing for adoption and going through the proper channels. The system will be reinvented, this tech will be absorbed. A new system is being built by the centralized authorities, i.e. the central banks and governments. When this is all said and done, nations will have platforms and the innovators will build around their platforms.
There are issues with them. There's sometimes huge issues, sometimes smaller issues, but smaller issues that become big issues under stress. And so you can't have them at the core. They may play some roles, just to be clear, and again, this may be too techy, but there are roles for what are called native currencies in smart contract networks and some wholesale finance opportunities. And so you see a lot of activity around that. Based off of Ethereum or Ripple.
The native tokens that operate smart contract networks like Ethereum will have a role, and some of the wholesale finance opportunities like Ripple. Mark specifically said native tokens, then mentions Ripple. The messaging service RippleNet offers are not native tokens. A native token on RippleNet is XRP. The central banks are testing Interledger Protocol, and XRP is a settlement asset that is optimized for Interledger. Now, what does wholesale finance opportunities mean? Wholesale finance is between large corporates, medium corporates, trade finance, mortgage brokers, real estate developers, and banks. I see central banks creating platforms that use Ethereum smart contracts and Interledger Protocol as a foundation of the next-gen walled gardens. Right now, the Fed and large banks have a closed system. I believe the future will incorporate all small, medium, and large banks with the Fed in one walled garden. Wealth transferring from this walled garden outside of the walled garden in international scenarios will be bridged with XRP, or the wholesale market from international business to bank. Ripple used FNA to simulate liquidity needs over the network. That made it possible to determine the required liquidity flows within a hub bank to support the volumes and values to justify the benefits of a new service network. FNA is designed to make networks safer, to optimize liquidity, and make efficient networks. A hub bank is at the center of the network, assuring liquidity for the rest of the banks. I believe this is why we see major banks partnered with Ripple. They're at the center of their jurisdictions, while the smaller SMEs and remittance companies plug into those local networks. I believe eventually we will see all these local hubs connected internationally with XRP. Ripple uses FNA's solution. So does the U.S. Department of Treasury, the CME Group, the world's largest financial derivatives exchange, the Department of Defense, Finality, one of the largest consortia for wholesale payments using blockchains, Payment Canada, Canada's clearinghouse. The systemically important uses FNA's analytic solution, and so does Ripple.
Based off of Ethereum or Ripple, other currencies like that, and they may well have a role.
The central banks are testing Interledger. They will have a role.
But at the core of the system, my judgment, you would build out from a central bank digital currency, and that it creates a lot of opportunities. It creates an opportunity for more competition, by the way, in the system as a whole, and it. I would expect, no guarantees, and others will make the decision, that the UK will be, if not at the forefront, very close to the forefront in terms of developing this to the benefit of, and this will help unlock some of the things we were talking about a bit before in terms of making a better environment for small business as well.
This is the Bank of International Settlements Annual Economic Report of 2020. The Bank of England is updating its wholesale payment system with an eye to enabling digital interoperability, e.g. with tokens. The Bank of England is updating to a wholesale payment system with keeping interoperability in mind for tokens. This was the use case Mark Carney gave earlier for Ripple.
And some wholesale finance opportunities, and so you see a lot of activity around that. Based off of Ethereum or Ripple, other currencies like that, and they may well have a role. But at the core of the system,
So we know that the Bank of England is keeping interoperability in mind with tokens for the wholesale payment system. Carney said this is where Ripple could play a role. Do you remember when Bob Way said once you have atomic settlement between two central banks, the game is over? All their central banks will follow.
But look, the Bank of England is a paid customer of Ripple's. There's another central bank we haven't announced that we're working with very actively.
There are two central banks working closely with Ripple. Big corporates, mortgage brokers, etc. that tap into the wholesale markets could be using XRP to settle transactions in a regulated manner. If these large institutions can settle funds within minutes for a fraction of a penny, what would that do to those nations' economies? It would stimulate those economies. We are still facing an economic slowdown, and stimulating the economy is needed now more than ever.
Well, I think that China to some extent, very quickly, it backed into this because their private companies, Alibaba and we developed their own currencies, or effectively did. And then what we've seen is that being pulled back into the state, kind of proving my point from before. First point. Second point is that there are broader forces that lead to the renminbi potentially becoming the reserve currency over time, size of the Chinese economy. But very importantly, what happens, and what happened when the UK stopped being the reserve currency. It took a lot longer than people thought it would be when it gave up and it became the US dollar. But what happens first is that people start pricing transactions in that currency.
The dollar is being inflated and inflated, yet the U.S. economy does not produce goods or services. We are the largest debtor nations, while the rest of the world needs to produce in order to have wealth. The U.S. can simply print money and exchange printed money for the wealth of the rest of the world. Do you remember when Ripple welcomed the People's Bank of China?
And so what's incredibly important is, in a world that's moving towards digital, is, well, what currency is being used to price transactions in terms of digital? Now, it's not the renminbi today. It could be, as you get the spread of the Chinese tech companies and social media companies, could be.
We're moving towards a digital economy, and the Chinese digital yuan has an advantage. The Internet of Value is about to emerge, and when we move into this new world, there's going to be reserve currencies for the Internet of Value. The US, the ECB, the Bank of England need to compete with the digital yuan before it becomes the reserve currency of the next-gen financial system.
Although if the US, the UK, the ECB move in parallel, it's just as likely to be a mix of those that we'll all be familiar with, albeit at a lower cost. And I'll make one point that isn't as obvious, I should stop here, which is that this will mean, quite big enough savings for merchants that get passed on to consumers that it's noticeable if we do it right.
Noticeable savings all around. We are in crypto because we believe in the tech. The tech offers efficiency that this world has never seen, yet it's not being utilized. When crypto, blockchain, DLT is used at scale, this will have a deflationary effect, a higher velocity of trade, money, everything. The economies of the world are about to get an upgrade. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Edmund Burke. Thank you for liking, watching, and subscribing. If you enjoy my work and wish to support my channel, please consider joining my Patreon. Remember to hit the bell.